Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, in the last talk we talked about the art of persuasion, and we continue with that as I had shared with you in this session as well. And what we are looking at, what we started off with in the last session was attitude. Now, whose attitudes are we talking about here? We are obviously talking about the attitudes of the people who are to be influenced. And because attitudes modify perception, they act as mediators to persuasion. That means, different attitudes can decide how the persuasion will succeed or fail, or in which direction a particular persuasion will go. And as I told you, the experiments that we have done, which are pretty interesting and which you can find in the context of the discussion forum, reveal to you some of these issues, as well as the papers that we have provided about how attitudes signify or present certain issues related to persuasion. Sometimes persuasion is about changing attitudes. Now, this is a very difficult thing, but as we discussed in the last session, Arjun's attitude was changed by Lord Krishna over a period of 2 hours. Okay. So, attitude is a psychological construct, it is a mental emotional entity that inheres or characterizes the person. So, attitudes have certain qualities, and if we look at those qualities, it becomes easy for us to understand how they can be manipulated. Attitudes are learnt, they are not physiological, they do not come to us, they are not embedded in our system right from the beginning. We gradually learn them. Let us say that if I develop the attitude that being involved in politics is good, now this is something which I have learnt, or if I develop the attitude that being involved in politics is bad, now that is again an attitude I have learnt within the socio-cultural context. Attitudes are emotional in the sense that they have an emotional connotation. For instance, when I say good or bad, value judgment is involved, and when value judgments are involved, that means the concept of good and bad come in. So, emotions come in, I feel that I like it or I dislike it. So, those things come in, and attitudes finally lead to decision making. So, let us say that if I have an attitude that Swadeshi goods are good, I should be buying things which are made in India. Now, obviously, I have a specific kind of emotions towards everything that is made in India, and probably at the end of the day I would buy products which are by Indian companies rather than by multinational companies. So, the decision making, I would whether I should buy local potato chips or packed and marketed potato chips, okay, under a certain brand. These decisions are again things which are based distinctively upon our attitudes. Values are ideologies, they are ideals, guiding principles. If I have a value that well, expensive goods should not be bought, expensive chips, potato chips should not be bought, then I am buying the same group of let us say local made potato chips, but for a different set of reasons. The reasons have changed now, because I will value money. I believe that less money should be spent. I am not interested in whether it is made in India or China or in the US. And beliefs are more specific and cognitive, where we are talking about specific kinds of let us say thought processes that operate, and where you see that you hold on to certain ideals, certain values again in a specific way. Values can be more generic, whereas beliefs are a more specific subcategory, I would say, of values. And mind you, these significantly influence persuasion. Attitudes can be strong or weak. So, anything which we consider important, towards that our attitudes would be strong, whereas things which we do not consider important, our attitude would be weak. For instance, when we want to put our children to school, which school this person is going to go into. If I consider education as significant, I will say that yes, I need to put that child in this specific school. On the other hand, if education for me is just a casual thing, I will say that just put him in any school you wish to. So, that is very important. Ego involvement is the next point that we need to look at. Core values of the self, what I like, what I dislike, we have already talked about that when we talked about values and all that. Attitudes deviate significantly from neutrality, so it is a detachment. So, this is something we have to keep in mind, that very often the moment we are talking attitudes, it is a deviation from a neutral path. If I say that politics may be good or bad, I do not have any opinion about it. That is not an attitude, it is an attitude, but it is from a point of view of persuasion not a very significant attitude maybe. Certainty, when we are convinced of something and when we believe that something is correct, then it has an impact on our decision making to a significant extent. For instance, if I believe that Indian goods are better than foreign goods, well, if this belief is strong, bordering on certainty, then well, that is it. Or if I work for a company and I know that this product is not good, this knowledge, the certainty influences accessibility. How quickly the thing comes out of our mind. Now, this is an interesting thing, because this gets linked to something which is known as a cognitive bias. In cognitive bias, you see that in spite of the fact that if we think a little deeper, the correct choice would come to us, we often take the wrong decision. These are known as cognitive biases, and they happen for a number of reasons, because very often we do what is known as heuristic decision making, quick decision making. We do not want to analyze things, we go on impulse, because that is easier for us to do. Now, in such situations you find that you see that accessibility becomes a key component. Let us say that we are talking about buying a bottle of cold drink, and I remember only the names of 2 cold drinks. So, I will pick up either of one of them, whereas there might be 10-15 different cold drinks arrayed over there, but I do not have the time and I do not have the intent of looking at it. So, importance is less, accessibility to the name of 1 or 2 of these drinks is more, I spell out their names. So, you see that 2 components, the one of importance, the other one of knowledge, accessibility, are interlinked over here. Knowledge, where we are highly informed about the topic. If I know how cold drinks are made, then well, I will have a specific way of looking at it, whether to take it or not would be very strongly formulated by that. I might be simply ignoring the names of the brands, because deep down I know they are more or less the same kind of thing. So, knowledge. Hierarchical organization, see attitudinal structure is there, where you see that there are attitudes and sub attitudes, and where it fits into that will also significantly decide whether you are taking a decision in a particular way or not. However, that is fairly complex and we will not go into that. So, what are the functions of attitude? Attitudes, knowledge, because you have, they make us know what things are there. Utilitarian, they help us get rewards and punishments. So, when we have attitudes, attitudes include a certain amount of knowledge about certain things, maybe partial, maybe complete, whatever it is. Utilitarian, it is oriented towards doing something. Social adjustive, it helps us to refer to specific groups, find out where I stand in terms of those groups or certain groups of decision making for that matter. Social identity helps us create identity. I am a Coke drinker rather than a Pepsi drinker, I am a tea drinker rather than a coffee drinker. Okay. Value express represent our core values. I believe in green tea, which is healthy, as opposed to, let us say, tea with milk, which is unhealthy, or sugar, which is unhealthy. Ego defensive, and attitudes generally tend to protect us against unpleasant emotions. Now, when you are able to change somebody's attitude, you are able to convince that person that by changing the attitude, whatever was happening would become more pleasant. So, at the core of things that remains. Now, let us say that if we are talking about advertising, which comes in again and again, because that is where persuasion takes place in a significant way. Let us say that your attitude would change if you are convinced that buying a particular product would enhance your social prestige. As long as you did not link it to social prestige, you are not bothered, but then you find that everybody is wearing a branded shirt and you have not been wearing one, you have been wearing one which has been made by your tailor for the last 20 years, but then in your company that is not the case, and you realize that in spite of the fact that you do not believe in such things, you find that it is having an impact on the way you are being perceived. Now, once you realize that, and things change, so your attitude changes. Now, when we are trying to change attitudes, we target relevant beliefs, locate relevant reference groups, and we do a lot of other things. Now, these are things for you to fill up. Okay, I am not going to tell them in detail to you, but you use your heads and find out how is it that attitude and persuasions are linked together. In the discussion forum, you can write down your ideas. Now, I have a feeling that these are things which are better seen in the form of PPT, where you can go through them and look at the details of it, but what I am trying to share here is the way that decision making takes place about, let us say, car. And here is a very nice example of how a young couple are planning to buy a car and how different factors go into taking the decision. Please go through this and again point out what you feel about the decision making process that takes place over there. Now, having said that, now we will look at, we have identified what persuasive communication is, we have identified the various components of persuasive communication, and one of them which we have taken into consideration in a significant way is attitude, and in that context let us look at the effects of persuasive communication. How is it that it works or not works, and how different models have been proposed, and whether they work, these models work or not. This is something which we shall look at. Now, the first one is communicators' credibility. Okay. We have already talked about this earlier, who says it. Okay. The second one is the message. Obviously, the kind of appeal that it has, as we talked in terms of Aristotle, and who says it, okay, and the logic or the emotional dimension of it. Appeal, obviously, in terms of whether you like it, whether you do not like it, and all that. Audience personality trait, because different kinds of people have different kinds of cultural dimensions, they come from different backgrounds, they are oriented differently. We have already talked about that. For instance, if you walk into a cafe with your grandchild or with your grandfather, let us say, you find that your grandfather would be interested in an entirely different set of food and beverage items than you would be. So, you see that age is an aspect of audience, okay. Gender is another aspect of audience. There are many other components like culture, linguistic components, like whether you are speaking in a particular language or in another language, whether you belong to the northern part of the country or the southern part of the country or the eastern part of the country. All these things do influence how your attitude is changed. All these affect if we are persuaded or not, how we are persuaded or not, and this is known as the Yale attitude change approach. So, there is a communication, message learning, and then the things which happen is attention, comprehension, learning, acceptance, and retention. Now, this seems too childish, too realistic, too simplistic, and then on the basis of this, if these things happen, attitude changes. But does it really happen this way? Probably not. Probably the model could be a little more complex. Now, we can look at the cognitive response approach to persuasion, where people's all mental reactions to the message is taken into account. Here you find that this is where the message is highlighted, that the message is giving all these things. Message draws attention, message is comprehended, the message is learnt, and it modifies. Now, the fact is that this is an approach where you are looking at, let us say, ad message, without taking into consideration that one might react negatively to the ad message, one might argue with oneself, one might have a dialogue with oneself. Now, these are things which are not accounted for here. On the other hand, when there is a communication, which is what is taking place here, communication and message learning, when we are talking, along with the various components we are talking over here, something else is happening, and that is, you see that there is a cognitive response. The cognitive response also includes an emotional response. Okay. There are pro arguments, there are counter arguments, thoughts that originate with the message, creatively elaborate on the message or are irrelevant to the message. All these have their impact on the way that the message is perceived and the way an attitude is developed towards the message. But just developing an attitude is not the end of the story, because you need to act upon an attitude. Let us say that at the end of an advertisement, you are persuaded that it is a good advertisement. At the end of the advertisement, you are persuaded that it is a good product, but unless you are persuaded to buy it, the final decision making takes place. Well, things are not really conducive, the total persuasion process is not over. So, components like forewarning, distraction, and we have inoculation theory where a certain thing is introduced, induction theory where other people influence the way that you are persuaded, you are inducted by other people, peripheral processing, things which are happening outside the realm of the decision making still manage to influence your decision making process. Then the jargons, the language dimension, cogent argument, which is central processing, quick thinking versus elaborate thinking, heuristic and critical thinking, all these components you find play a significant role in the process of decision making. And as I shared with you, maybe 1 or 2 papers that I will share would suggest the complex processes involved and how difficult it is to do research in this area. But mind you, research is going on and we are doing a little research together as well. Now, persuasion tips are here, a few case studies have been given. You might look up these case studies, and again, as I told you earlier, we are not going to elaborate on these. You need to look at the slides and complete these, and in the discussion forums where open ended questions are there, you can participate and respond to these, some of these. Okay. So, I have given you 3 case studies, okay, and how you respond to this is what will be asked of you. But after moving on with attitudes, let us now focus on the people, and then we will move on to language. Who says it? Now, you see that, does that person have charisma? Is he somebody like Shah Rukh Khan? Okay. Brand endorsement, lot of advertisements have our stars, film stars endorsing them, or our sports stars endorsing them. So, the charisma, and very often it is difficult to differentiate between charisma and authority. Authority is somebody who often may not be known, as in let us say toothbrush or toothpaste advertisements where a doctor comes over there and says that you should buy this, an authority figure. He may not be known to us, but he represents or she represents an authority, credibility. Okay. So, whatever this person is saying makes sense, even if let us say that person has charisma, even if that person is let us say very let us say popular star, but if this person says that stealing is good, credibility is compromised. So, obviously, you will think 5 times before accepting such a statement. So, that they all are integrated, they all are linked together. So, the expert, trustworthy, gets goodwill, all these things, knowledge bias, what you know or do not know, reporting bias, what is reported to you and whether you get it correctly or not. Now, these are also things which play an important role, and social attractiveness. How likable is that person, how similar, how you are able to identify with that person, how physically attractive that person is. These also play a significant role in getting persuaded, and these become very significant in the context of politics as well, because you see that political leaders play, or the popularity, the success of a political leader to a very great extent depend on these. Certain studies were done using popular political figures, 2 images being shown in the US, and people being asked quickly, who would you vote to, and it was found that the people who looked at these images for just less than 15 seconds and responded, in many cases, almost 70% cases, these were the people who got the votes, which suggests that some kind of a heuristic decision making process is actually underway, which means that you are not deciding on the basis of logical analysis, on the background and the history, because the impulsive decision of people who did not know these people and just responded matched 70% of the times with actual voters who had been listening to these people over a period of time. A detailed analysis suggested that if the eyes looked trustworthy, people tended to believe these people. So, you see so many other components other than, let us say, persuasiveness, speech and all those things also play a significant role in how we get persuaded. So, this is a very open field, but it is good to know about the way that these things operate, and there is a reason behind that. The reason being that we are in a course on soft skills, and persuading people is a soft skill which you need to build up and develop. And as I have said right at the beginning, it is not necessarily unethical, because when you are trying to persuade somebody, you are not actually cheating that person. You believe in something and you feel that the other person will benefit from it when she believes in it, and that is just what you are trying to do. That is very often what business collaborations, negotiations, tie-ups are all about, and in many contexts probably that is what you are going to do. Or if you believe in the product that you are marketing, well, that is what you are exactly doing. All right. So, the points that I have made in a slightly let us say a research oriented context have a practical significance, and we will sum it up for you at a later point of time. But meanwhile, we come back to endorsements, examples of endorsements, and as you can see for yourself, the Got Milk campaign was very successful with developing awareness about the relevance of milk, that milk should be drunk by us and should go into our system. This awareness built up over a period of short span of a couple of years, and almost 95% of the Americans actually became aware after this campaign Got Milk. So, we have done with the endorsement value, and here you can see that here also it is endorsed by stars. Okay. So, film stars endorsing it, and so these are examples of authority figure, or let us say very popular figures, charismatic figures doing advertisements in order to persuade people, and it actually succeeded. Now, let us move on to the next component, which is the message factors. What is there in the message to a very great extent significantly influences what is the level of persuasion as well. So, message sidedness, there is a positive sided or negative sided, conclusions that you draw from the message, order of presentation, primacy versus recency. It is generally found that the last part of the message is better remembered, and that also has an impact on people. When we are looking at the message content, evidence, fear and framing, these are the three strategies which play a significant role. And when we come to language components, speed of speech, how fast somebody speaks, powerless versus powerful language, and intense language, that is emotive language. These are the various components which have been through research found to be successful in persuasive communication. Now, if you want to take home lessons from this, obviously, if you are talking about an advertisement or you are talking about, let us say, presentation, or you are talking about talking to somebody in day to day life or in a business transaction, I have a feeling that all the three major components will come into play, and you need to be aware of them. Now, message structure. A one-sided message presents only one perspective, a two-sided communication presents both the sides, and very often is more persuasive. So, let us say somebody is making a business deal, and when he is making that, he points to both the pros and cons, but however the pros seem to be more. The person who is listening to this person feels that, okay, this is a realistic thing, this car has these many good qualities, however these are the bad qualities. Now, you compare the two. Now, when things are presented in this way, the other person feels that the seller is trying to be transparent, he is trying to be honest now. So, a one-sided message communicates a sense of dishonesty, whereas a two-sided message, however loaded it might be on one side, is still considered to be more honest. So, two-sided messages influence attitudes more than one-sided messages. When the communication mentions but does not demolish an opponent's viewpoint, actually a two-sided message is less compelling. So, you need to be strategic about how you are actually using it. Okay. So, if next time you are speaking, trying to persuade somebody to buy your product, persuade somebody to take you, then you have a two-sided message, but at the end of it, your side of the message, the one which you are trying to endorse, should be stronger and automatically lead to some kind of a conclusion. Okay, should be compelling. Now, there have been a lot of research in these areas, okay, that messages have to be explicit. Explicit messages are more easily understood than subtle messages. Symbolic messages, where the meaning is not finally unfolded and left to the audience to unfold, very often do not work. Okay. So, this is something which you should apply for yourselves, and examples have been given over here. Okay. And next we move on to the other aspect which we are discussing with fear apple. Okay. So, we can go through this text together. Parents use fear from the get go to discourage children from approaching dangerous objects, and fear apple is very often used in our day to day life as for instance, when I get angry with my child, I say that if you do not read, then you will not be able to do well in the exams. When you do not do well in the exams, then you do not get a good job. When you do not get a good job, then you will suffer. So, you have a train of logic. What you are trying to do is persuade the child to read using fear appeal, and here are some few other examples from the book that I have been referring to again and again, that is from Perloff's The Dynamics of Persuasion. So, but then you see that it can also backfire. There are examples of that, and okay, and it can also have other kinds of implications. You can have what is known as an unrealistic optimism bias, which means that okay, thousands of people are smoking cigarette, I am also smoking cigarette, nothing is going to happen to me. Okay, it will happen to other people will get cancer, I will not get cancer. So, this kind of thing also happens. So, there is a lot of complex there are a lot of complex issues involved in this. I have made a few points over here, you can go through them in your leisure when you go through the slides. Now, we move on to the other aspect in the context of the message, which is the language, powerful versus powerless. Again, you go through the slides in detail. Okay. The only thing I would like to say here quickly is that powerful language is language which is non-hesitant, which is something which is assertive, and whatever I discussed when I was talking about, let us say, voice speech, when we were talking about speaking skills, also apply here, because language does manage to convey a lot of things, voice does manage to convey a lot of things. Okay. Hesitations, language communicating a sense of hesitation, uncertainty, these things are generally not very persuasive, and that should be obvious to you. Language intensity is how intensely it provokes you. Okay. Okay, a metaphor maybe, and strong and vivid language, illustrations, examples, these work better than detached language. So, language which is emotional also works in a powerful way in persuading people, because very often the cognitive side is there to persuasion, but the emotional side is very much there. Strong likes and dislikes play a role in persuasion as much as the logical argument, which also plays a significant role in persuasion. And when we are talking about language intensity, we are talking about the logical side of the emotional side of things. So, as I told you a little earlier, here is the summary of the main points that we have made, and I would like you to go through these concepts in a systematic way, because then they are going to help you realize how to become a persuasive communicator. Persona, pleasant personality, good communication skills, confidence, smile, approachability, credibility, whatever you say should make sense, should be realistic, and should not be outrageously outlandish. Language and communication, persuasive language means figurative language, emotional language, also logical language, showing both the sides of things. Authority figure, if you can refer within your context to some people having used it, let us say selling something and saying that these people and the other people have, they have all used it, this institute or another well known institute has used it, these can act as authority figures. Or if you are yourself an authority figure, desire to believe in the other person. Out of 5 different things you have to say, probably the person is interested to believe in 2 of them or is interested in 2 of them. focus on those. Familiarity, if the person is familiar with something, then use a different strategy. If somebody is not familiar, you can generate interest by giving a lot of information. However, when somebody is familiar with something, probably in that direction, and if somebody likes that thing, it is probably much easier to persuade that person. Exclusivity and availability, these relate to marketing your product, marketing your concept, whatever, that is rare and yet it is available. And relevance, obviously for the person who is making use of it. Curiosity, intriguing, exciting, interesting. And then of course, use of media. We have already talked about how to use PowerPoints, how to use multimedia, how to use different aspects of let us say visuals and auditory channels. And social media, we are using it every day of our life. We are already doing it for our experiments as well. So when we use all these things in a meaningful and carefully sustained way, based on what we have done today, you feel that, or I am sure that you will get to know that persuasive communication will be successful. However, it is not just good enough that I spend an hour sharing these points with you. You must learn to practice this in your life in order to become a better and more persuasive communicator, or in order to practice persuasion in various walks of your life. Thank you very much.